Okay, colleagues, please take your seats. We'll start shortly. Welcome. Okay, let us start. So the sixth meeting of the 61st session of the Commission for Social Development is called to order. So I invite the Commission to resume its consideration of the agenda item 3C, very exciting one, entitled Emerging Issues, Social Resilience and Social Development, in order to hold a panel discussion under the theme Policies to Bolster Social Resilience in the Context of More Frequent and Complex Crises. And I'm pleased to welcome the distinguished panelists we have today for our discussion. Mr. Michael Woolcock, lead social scientist in the Development Research Group at the World Bank. Madam Obiageli Esquesili, President of the Human Capital Africa, founder of the School for Politics, Policy and Governance, and Senior Economic Advisor at the Africa Economic Development Policy Initiative, ADP. Mr. Marek Kamiński, the founder of the Kamiński Foundation and explorer of the World Explorer, he can explain it later. And Mr. Meir Bink, Chief Executive Officer of the Open University of Israel. I'm also pleased to welcome the moderator, Madam Angela Kawandami, Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Community Development and Social Services of Zambia. Welcome, Madam. Before I hand over the floor to the moderator, I wish to remind the panelists to please keep within their allocated time limit of 7 to 9 minutes per presentation, and delegation to keep within the 3-minute time limit or less during the interactive discussion, which I hope will follow the panel. So I thank the participants for the understanding and for you all, colleagues. And Ms. Kawandami, you have the floor. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, distinguished delegates, esteemed panelists, and attendees. It is my privilege to moderate today's discussion on policies to bolster social resilience in the context of more frequent and complex crises. The 63rd session of the Commission for Social Development comes at a pivotal time. As we reflect on the legacies of the World Summit for Social Development held 3 decades ago in Copenhagen, it is clear that the principles of social inclusion, poverty eradication, and equity remain as vital as possible. However, our global landscape has transformed significantly, presenting new and compounding challenges that demand urgent and innovative solutions. Today, crises are more frequent, interconnected, and complex, spanning geopolitical, economic, health, and environmental spheres. These crises, intensified by rapid digital transformation, demographic shifts, and climate change, test the resilience of our societies and institutions. Social resilience, defined as the capacity of individuals and societies to prevent, absorb, adapt, and recover positively from crises, has become a critical framework for our shared work. We are fortunate to have an exceptional panel of speakers who bring diverse perspective and expertise to this critical topic. Mr. Michael Woolcock will underscore the importance of strengthening social solidarity and cohesion, which serve as foundational pillars for more resilient societies. Ms. Obi Ezekwesili will highlight the transformative power of inclusive governance and education in building resilience. Mr. Marek Kamiński, drawing on his unique experiences as an explorer and innovator, will discuss mental resilience and how it can be fostered to help individuals and communities to adapt and thrive. Mr. Mia Bing will focus on the critical elements required to build resilience in vulnerable populations, emphasizing the intersection of community, infrastructure, and trust. Together, their presentations will offer a comprehensive understanding of the multidimensional nature of resilience and the policy actions needed to reinforce it. As we navigate today's discussion, I encourage reflection on several overarching themes. Number one, the governance and social cohesion. How can effective governance structures promote trust and solidarity? What role do inclusive decision-making and participatory mechanisms play in creating more resilient societies? Number two, preparedness and foresight. With the increasing unpredictability of crises, how can we strengthen foresight, monitoring, and early warning systems? What proactive measures can countries adopt to reduce vulnerabilities and enhance collective readiness? Three, investing in human capital. Resilience starts with people. How can we ensure access to quality education, healthcare, and social protection for all, especially the marginalized and vulnerable groups? As the moderator, my role is to guide this dialogue and ensure we capture the wealth of insights from our panelists and participants. After the presentations, we'll open the floor for the question and answer session, where I encourage you all to engage actively. Before we start, I would like to remind the panelists that they have 9 minutes for their interventions. So without much ado, let me invite our first panelist, Mr. Michael Wilcock, to share his reflections.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. It's an honor to be able to be in this forum and to speak with you. Can we have my slides up on the screen, please? Can you put them on mine here as well? Yep, there we go. Very good. Thank you very much. I'm going to use my time today to talk about 3 different aspects of the ways in which I think we need to be addressing these questions of social resilience, and they're particularly the way in which we harness solidarity and social cohesion. To do that, I'm going to focus on these 3 things. The first of those is to stress that if we're going to be doing all of this kind of work, especially in very complex settings, we need to recognize that development policies are only as effective as they are implemented, that they are only as effective as the shared legitimacy that they enjoy, and that they themselves can be part of the problem and part of the solution. And I'm going to try and disentangle those and give you some sense of where I'm coming from. Beyond what social policies seek to achieve, which is what we seem to mostly focus on, especially in forums like this, my focus today is going to be on how policies are selected, accepted, implemented, and evaluated. Those different components are all crucial to getting the kinds of outcomes that we require. So, first point, policies are as effective as their implementation. When we think about a policy, I think it's important to recognize that we're doing so in response to, implicitly or explicitly, a kind of development problem. And the kinds of social problems that we are addressing are very different from many of the other economic problems that we encounter. And trying to recognize what is distinctive about a social problem is crucial then to being able to map that onto a credible response. Most, if not all, social programs, I suggest, are responding to problems which most likely don't have a clear solution. They have ideas about what categories of solutions might be, but not specifically how it's going to manifest itself in a particular place. And when it is implemented, it's likely to unfold along very non-linear, non-uniform, highly variable trajectories, depending on the context, scale, and implementation quality, which is to say, we won't be able to say that we have found something that works in the way that we want to be able to say, especially in large development organizations, because we're big and we are designed to function at scale. So we want things to be uniform. But much of what we do in the social space is not that. Most of us want to focus on the technical design characteristics because that's what we're trained in, that's what we know, that makes us feel good and makes us feel smart. But I suggest that if we're in the business of trying to build solidarity and cohesion, these are kinds of problems require extensive discretion, ongoing face-to-face interactions, and intensive negotiation, which also they depend on people. They are highly relational in terms of what they're doing, and thus are going to have inherently highly variable outcomes. But the capability for policy implementation generally around the world, as I argued with co-authors in a book a few years ago, was really trying to show that empirically, much of what we're trying to do around the world is being done by organizations or by governments that are really stagnating or declining over time, not getting better at what they're supposed to be doing. And building that capability is essential to achieving all of the Sustainable Development Goals, but especially those that have a key social component to them, such as health, security of healthcare, education, teachers showing up every day for 10 years to teach kids, solidarity and cohesion required to build collective understandings and applications of these things. Yet when we do so much of our work in what we call capacity building, most of that fails as well. So we need some sort of alternative for thinking about big questions around implementation and not just focusing on design characteristics. Secondly, I think policies are as effective as their shared legitimacy, and in conflict environments or complex settings more generally, policies enhancing solidarity and cohesion turn on the credibility of the decision makers who decide what to get done, the consistency with which they uphold the agreed upon rules and don't take matters into their own hands, the extent to which rules align with the broad societal values of the particular country or context that we're working in. They will turn on broad participation and transparency and the perceived benefits of what we're doing for impacted populations. All of this needs to lead to credible claims being made across very different types of groups. The credibility of decision makers, the ways in which different societal groups interact with each other, the tensions or complementarities between elite factions, between national governments and their local government counterparts, and between national governments and the international community of global actors. If those aren't present, then a lot of what we're doing just by articulating our aspirations for a particular policy aren't going to work. The legitimacy of a change process, especially ones that are inherently set up to create disappointment for someone, such as an election, or that require fundamental alterings of how a society is configured when we're addressing questions of gender equity, all of that is crucial for managing the contention, brokering trade-offs, and forging cohesion and enhancing solidarity. Development policies will struggle where societal groups despise one another, where elite factions use lies and violence to secure power, where there is little coherence or trust between local and national authority, and where governments reject international law and covenants to which they are in fact a signatory. So all these nice policies that we come up with, unless they're being able to engage with these local contexts in ways that imbue them with the legitimacy they need to do their difficult work, are probably going to struggle. Thirdly, and perhaps I don't think this is controversial, and I applaud the note that was prepared for this meeting, which I think spelled out many of these things in further detail. But development policies themselves can be part of the problem and part of the solution. And even, or sometimes especially when they succeed. When are they part of the problem? They are part of the problem when they paradoxically succeed in achieving our core development objectives, such as education, maternal health, rising productivity, and incomes. All of those things can undermine community and solidarity and cohesion by marginalizing, for example, parents, elders, leaders, or groups who remain illiterate, who are then regarded as foolish or silly because they themselves can't read or write. Challenging long-standing cultural practices. Every group in the world has a theory about how children should be born, and for people to rock up in white lab coats and tell them, actually, no, you've been doing this wrong for 10,000 years, you should do it the way we tell you to, is likely not to be seen as a very locally legitimate way of proceeding. Monetizing established mechanisms of exchange by introducing money into economies that have historically been all done through bartering and through negotiation, and that itself being as an essential source of social solidarity, when it's mediated through a third party, in effect, you are changing the ways in which social relations are experienced and lived. When you raise incomes at one level, as recent research has shown from Malaysia, you can simultaneously have rising incomes, which counts as development success, but you can have higher expenditures as well, which lead to higher indebtedness, which means people have to take on 2 jobs, which means you have a whole different relationship with your children and with your elderly parents. All of these things are happening because we've succeeded in development, not because we've failed. And yet most of what we think we're supposed to be doing is all inherently and always good in the social space, and sometimes it just isn't. Well, how do we then and then the most obvious empirical relationship we have is that if you get richer, you get more urbanized. Historically, we required 70 farmers to feed 100 people. Now we need 3. That means in the name of development, 67 farmers lost their jobs and now have to migrate to live probably in the outskirts of cities and trying to make life better for themselves that way. But is that really a successful development from a social perspective? I think most people living in those squatter settlements would say probably not. Part of the solution, what can we do to try and respond to those things more effectively? Well, I think we can be much better at creating and protecting safe space for deliberation and negotiation. We have to, if we're going to imbue legitimacy into what we're doing, those people that are most affected by it surely have to be part of the decision-making process. That will entail undertaking very serious investments to understand local contextual realities. Everybody nods politely when we talk about context mattering, but do we actually work to do that, to elicit the kind of knowledge we need? The bigger the organization, the harder it is, like the World Bank, like the United Nations, to actually do this thing of taking context really seriously. We need to do a much better job. We can do a much better job of preparing consultation mechanisms for managing the wrenching trade-offs that are often associated with things. We can look at the glass half full and count a lot of very successful things that happen in people's lives. But the downside or the darker side of that same half empty glass is that lots of change has been made by design, by definition. We need to do a much better job of enhancing the capability and local legitimacy of what's being done and respecting prevailing practices, especially where those pertain to local governance, where they pertain to intimate matters pertaining to birthing, and to local justice and how right and wrong are deemed to have occurred and what kinds of punishments. Doesn't mean we always celebrate local as inherently good either. It just means that there's just a lot of hard conversations and negotiations that need to happen in order for that to be pulled off credibly. And then I think making impact claims in the light, in a more technical sense, making impact claims in the light of reasoned expectations about what we should expect things to be doing. Because most of these social projects are going to be unfolding in non-linear, non-uniform, highly variable ways, only having baseline and follow-up data is not probably going to be enough to be able to credibly answer how and for whom these interventions did or didn't work. I think I would add also we need to do a much better job of dealing with risk in the way that most of us deal with risk, which is through better insurance. And I think thinking about providing new forms of risk management through insurance is an underappreciated, very boring, but potentially very important way of addressing these kinds of questions. So that's the essence of what I've been trying to say. The details, I think, are laid out in Wade Davis's wonderful book, The Wayfinders, are just about all the ways in which modern life is just completely changing social realities for people, and especially for Indigenous people in Latin America, but elsewhere, and 2 books that I've done over the recent years. This middle one looking especially at these questions of implementation, the latter looking much more at these questions of legitimacy and how we engage with what we're doing. I think that's my 7 minutes or 8 minutes. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilcock. I will now invite the delegations that wish to comment on his presentation to pose questions, and you can do so by just pressing your microphone button. Okay, we can go to our next speaker, who is Ms. Obijele Ezekwelesa, who will highlight the transformative power of inclusive governance and education in building resilience. Obi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I hope
You can
am I on?
press the white
This,
button.
okay, excellent. Thank you, Madam Moderator. Just so that somebody doesn't call me the wrong name when they next say me. My name is Obiageli Ezekwesili, but you can call me Obi for short. Thank you very much, you and Dessa, for convening this session and asking me to be part of it. I do want to pick up from where Michael really laid a lot of emphasis, and that's the issue of governance, the capabilities that are missing in being able to articulate policies and effectively implement them to the spirit and intent on the basis of which they were thought of. I have been asked specifically to focus on resilience as far as it concerns issues around governance and education. And so drawing from my experiences as Minister of Education of Nigeria in the early 2000s of life, and then as Vice President of the World Bank, responsible for the Africa Region program, and as one who is unrelenting as an advocate for societies that don't leave people behind, I would want to say that when it comes to the matter of the governance aspects of addressing the gaps that we see in the capacity of our world to be socially resilient, one would go straight to what we have currently, which is that democracy is in crisis more than it had ever been. And that if democracy is a matter of supply and demand activities, we do know that the supply side of democracy has hijacked the space for democracy. And therefore, the demand side for democracy is pushed further away from really building the kinds of systems of governance that Michael so well spoke about. What do I mean by this? What I mean by this is that the power of the society to be resilient is dependent on how everyone feels cared for within society. And today's democratic processes are exclusionary in many ways. And that's because the supply side, meaning the tiny fraction of people who exercise political leadership in majority countries of the world today, have become monopoly Democrats. And that's an aberration. You can't be a Democrat and be a monopolist at the same time. But that's the distortion that has happened to democracy. And so, as part of the way of ensuring that we can build systems of governance that are competent and capable, we would have to go to the root cause of why society has bifurcated itself in a way that the public leadership process is not delivering the kinds of institutions and systems that offer credible policies for the benefit of the larger majority. That's my first critical point to make. And the second point that writes on that is the fact that we often think of, as Michael did say, and I'm going to be leaning on a number of the words that you use because it very much intersects with what I am talking about, is how we have abandoned the social, non-technical elements that are important for determining what defines the social contract within society. And so the concept of social contract, out of which all the issues of social cohesion and social collaboration and cooperation stem from, have been abandoned for a feeling that the more technical we are in the design of solutions to resilience within society, the more we would succeed. But as one who has been at the center of technical issues, whether when I was in government or when I was VP at the World Bank, it's become clear that a major problem is the absence of leadership for translating technical solutions to outcomes. There's a leadership gap. There's a leadership vacuum. There's a leadership famine in most of our societies. And to the extent that our societies are not realizing how much of a problem this is, what we have in most societies today is not just a silent majority. We have a stupid majority. Forgive my French. It's a stupid majority where leadership is absent, and yet people are waiting for some miracle to happen. There's no miracle that would happen in any of your countries until the majority of the people realize and recognize that if the technical solutions are not working, that there is something underlining the lack of results. Many countries are not producing results. A lot of what we are discussing will be taken care of naturally through the design of sound policies. A lot of what we're saying about needing to cater to the needs of the vulnerable, the marginalized, are no-brainers. They would have necessarily been part of the conversation around what priorities countries are pursuing. But that's lacking. Why? Because of this leadership vacuum. There's a serious leadership vacuum. And we do need to begin to think of how do we train leaders for the public space. We no longer train leaders. People, if they are photogenic enough and they smile well enough and they find the right mentors, they're going to get into public office. They don't have to care for society. They can care for themselves. And that would be just sufficient. So we do need to, in the past, we looked at leadership as a feely, touchy, sort of amorphous kind of stuff. But there is technical content to leadership. And we are missing that at this particular time. So I would suggest that in terms of looking at how we go further into solving the problems where we have technical solutions, we do know we have evidence of what works. We do. We have enormous evidence of what works in closing the gaps within society. But why don't they get adopted? It's that whole disconnect that we're trying to solve for. And then I go to the point on the urgency for us to look at the aspect that affects education. By the way, I forgot to make two other points on the governance side. Transparent public institutions, the fact that there are no consequences for failure of public leaders. How can there be no consequences? People fail and they get promoted for failing. They behave badly and they get rewarded for it. That's a society in disarray. So we do need to think of transparent public institutions, and we do need to think of the benefit, the value of trust. Society must get back the value of trust. Everything around the rule of law anchors on the fundamental benefit of societies that trust, because trust becomes the basis of negotiations and all the other things that matter. And of course, with open government data, a more technical approach comes around the matter of successes and failures. But quickly, to the matter of education. One of the things that I know, as one who has run education in my country, is that education became also a victim of this disconnect between governance and the people. And so education became the business of policymakers in education and the bureaucrats in education, or the minister of education, or the particular party in office. We do need to democratize ownership for education. Any society that would tackle the kinds of challenges that we see with social resilience would have to democratize the education process even much more than they probably already are doing. And so, number one thing in the case of Africa is how important it is to go to the basics. Do you know that 9 out of every 10 children in Africa are not achieving minimum proficiency level in literacy and numeracy? And the majority of these ones are the children of the poor in Africa. And yet, people are governing, cheerfully governing, year after year. The children of the poor are stuck in what I call intergenerational dynasty of poverty. And there is no consequence for it. Without foundational literacy skills, numeracy skills, it is impossible for those children to become competent members of society who can produce income for themselves, not to talk of adequacy or lack of it, of the income they produce. So we've got to really pay attention to the foundational levels of education. We must invest in foundational learning, ensuring that every child acquires the basic skills of life. Lifelong learning is a second part of it. Lifelong learning. Well, we now see that without lifelong learning, it's absolutely, you're talking about 3 people doing the job that 10 used to do. Well, the way that we're going, it might just be that nobody is doing it. We're just waiting on technology to do it for us. So how do we adapt? I am not one of those scared badly by AI. I simply am saying to myself, at the time and the cusp of the Industrial Revolution, there must have been fears as to what could happen to the human beings. So we're back again to a new revolution. And so the kind of policy conversations that should prepare us for ensuring that society does not fall apart and that our social fabric of how to govern and how to manage ourselves would be important. That's in the space of education. But are the education people ready for it? Are they ready? Are they capable of taking responsibility for that necessary conversation that we need within society? My final point is that, I was so vexed by the poor governance in my continent. So vexed by it. I'm one of the co-founders of Transparency International when I was a younger woman. And moutier at that time even, because I'm very mouty on the matters of governance. It worries me. The lack of governance is what imperils the possibilities of many more children that have no business being poor. And yet people don't worry about that. It just makes me, it saddens me to no end. And so I decided that I would do something about it. And so I went away. I decided to run for office. It was a shock to everybody. Because as you can see, I am not the political kind of person. I am not the one who knows how to say the opposite of what they really mean, But I ran for office. I ran for president of Nigeria in 2019. And then I came face to face with why politics was failing my country. And I left, I was on the ballot, but I stepped away from the ballot. And because there was a significant values clash between me and the political party. So I went away to study the nexus between poor quality of politics and economic growth and economic performance of our countries in Africa. And that led to what I now do, which is spreading the message of fixing politics in Africa. We must fix politics. If we do not fix politics, we have no business thinking that we're going to achieve economic growth and the kind of economic transformation. Because there's a very strong correlation between the quality of politics of any country and the economic performance that they have. Let's keep an eye on the United States of America. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Obi. We'll now go on to our next speaker, who's Mr. Marek Kamiński, who will be drawing on his unique experiences as an explorer and innovator. And he will discuss mental resilience and how it can be fostered to help individuals and communities to adapt and thrive.
Thank you, moderator. And may I have my presentation, please? Thank you, Obi, for, I couldn't agree more with your conclusions about democracy crisis and different crises that we live on. Also lack of leadership, lack of decisionship, and poor governance, and not ability to govern yourself before you govern organization or the states. And I will show you the problem of resilience maybe from different perspectives and try to address some solutions. Imagine, close your eyes. Imagine standing in the Arctic. Ice cracks softly under your feet. The wind cuts like a knife. Each step feels heavy as if you are holding the weight of the world. The horizon goes on forever, but you don't know if you are heading to safety or into more danger. Now open your eyes. The ice is gone, but the weight stays. This is the reality of millions of people today, not lost in the snow or silence, but in something colder, a crisis of meaning. A world where the hardest challenge isn't outside, but inside, a feeling of emptiness. We are living in the world of big numbers and overwhelming crises. In 2024, 68.3 million people had to leave their homes because of the wars and violence in 66 countries. By 2030, the climate crisis could push 120 million people into extreme poverty, leading to more depression, anxiety, and PTSD. These numbers are massive, but for many people, they feel distance, just statistics on the screen. Their own reality seems calm in comparison. They have money, they wake up, go to work, take care of their families. Life appears stable. Their own reality but inside it's a different story. When they struggle with their mental health or feel like they can't go, they often hear, others have it worse. Look at people in poorer countries. And while it is true that others face extreme hardships, it doesn't make this struggle any less real. Feeling like your problems don't matter only deepens the sense of helplessness. The quiet crisis of hopelessness and emptiness doesn't just affect the poor or excluded. It affects people who seem to have everything, yet feel like they have nothing. Job loss, lack of direction, and the fear of being unnecessary are growing reasons for depression and even suicide. And until we recognize that these struggles are valid, we cannot address the true scope of the crisis. Mental resilience is not something we are born with. It is a skill we can learn. It means staying strong, managing stress, and facing change. During my expeditions, I learned that physical strength isn't enough. The real fight happens in the mind, with a fear and doubt. Today, we all need to ask, are we strong enough inside to face the challenges ahead? Let me share the Janek story. At 7, he lost his home in a fire. At 8, he saw his younger brother drown. At 13, he had an accident with electricity, 1500 volt, that took his arm and leg. Why? These tragedies could have broke him, but they didn't. Why? Because he wasn't left alone. People supported him. They showed him he still had a future. Later, he joined me on expeditions both to the North and South Pole. People said it was impossible, yet he succeeded. This is the idea behind the Polaris method, a way to help anyone overcome challenges with the right support. Today's world needs a practical solution to help people handle crises. That's why I created Lifetime Academy, a program that teaches mental resilience, stress management, and how to adapt to challenges. This isn't just an idea. It's a practical tool that works in any country with any culture. The foundation of the program is simple. With the right tools and support, anyone can overcome challenges and achieve their goals. The Polaris method built on 3 key tools that focus on building mental resilience. First, Resilience Index 360. Second, Powerful Resilience. And third, Life Plan Up. Resilience Index 360 is a scientifically designed tool that measures 12 key areas of mental resilience, helping you identify strengths and areas for improvement. Powerful Resilience is an interactive program that teaches skills like emotional control, self-confidence, and seeing challenges as opportunities for growth. And finally, Life Plan Up, a free mobile application inspired by the Polaris method, guiding children and the young people in building mental resilience and achieving their goals. Through collaboration with governments, businesses, and international organizations, we can bring this program to schools, companies, and public institutions worldwide. Today, technology allows us to scale solutions faster than ever before. Our tools can be instantly adapted to different languages and cultures, making them accessible to people worldwide, from Europe to Latin America, from Africa to Asia. This is not about possibilities, it's about decisions. To help people and communities stay strong, we need to add mental resilience to school programs, teach students how to handle stress and adapt, support people in need. Lifeline Academy can help refugees, unemployed people, and those facing big problems. Build resilience at work, train leaders and employees to handle stress and uncertainty. Work together globally. WHO and UNICEF, you know the cost of mental health problems. Let's act together to solve them. We have a concrete solution that can be implemented immediately. Review our tools. See for yourselves. Today, I am not asking if we can implement global program from mental resilience. I am asking when. Because if not now, then when? If not us, then who? We have the tools. We can adapt, translate, and implement them in any country. We need partners who will help us to reach millions of people worldwide. We are ready to act. Will you join us? Thank you for your time. I hope you find the courage to make the right decisions, because resilience is not just about surviving, but about shaping the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kaminsky. We'll now listen to our last panelist, Mr. Mir Bing, who will focus on the critical elements required to build resilience in vulnerable populations, emphasizing the intersection of community, infrastructure, and trust.
Thank you, moderator. And did you know that in Israel, in the last decade, we more than doubled the number of students in the higher education from the minorities? How did we do it? There are 3 main key to succeed in a plan, a complexity plan. Can you put my slides, please? One is trust. You need the trust between the government and the community. The second is building a community. And the third one is building infrastructure, system, how to act. I'm Meir Bing, I'm very happy to be here. And I'm today the General Director of the Open University. Until a year ago, I was the General Director of the Minister of Social Equality. I was in charge about the minorities in Israel. In Israel, we are 10 million population. 2 million of them are minorities groups, including Muslim, Christian, Druze, and so on. The minorities are youth, very youth, and young families, and many of them face socioeconomic challenges. And the government decided 15 years ago to open an economical development authority for minorities. And the main goal is leading socioeconomic development among minority groups that will lead to prosperity, reduction of gaps, and integration in the national economy. We had a 5 years program that we finished 3 years ago, and then we start to work about a new 5-year program. And what is important, that we did it in partnership with the community leader, civil society organization, and the academia. And we build it together in 5 key domains: social development, economic development, local governance, improving the authorities, which is very, very important, housing and physical infrastructures. How does it look in the local level? This is a small town in the village of Israel, 10,000 people, called Jaljulia. You can see the main road that we build, a public park, investing in water and sewage infrastructure, many education program, a program of employment. So this is in a small local level, and what happened in the national level. In the national level, you can see here some example in the education system. Building education infrastructure, building young leaderships programs, strengthening scientific technologies education, and so on. And what were the outcome of these activities? You can see here that the percentage of students eligible for matriculation certificate rose dramatically in the minority in the last decade. It was a big gap between the minorities and the total student in Israel. And you can see that we closed this gap. And what happened in the higher education? 15 years ago, only 10% were from the minority in the student. And last year, almost 20% were from the minorities. And you can see it also in the MA and the PhD students. You can see also in the capital market, women, unfortunately, do not go to work in that community. Only 30% went to work 5 years ago. And you can see that last year, almost 50% go out to the labor market. And what happened to their salaries? You can see that the minority salaries increase on 4% every year in the last decade. And you can see that in the total population, the increase was only 2.7. So we start to close the gap. And unfortunately, as you know, a year and a half ago, we have a big war that started. And this affects about many aspects of life and also the economy in part. And what we did with the minorities in Israel during the war, because we have a trust with the community leaderships, at the first week of the war, we established a joint emergency center in Kfar Kasem, a big town in the center, Arabic town. And you can see here the president of Israel come to speak with the local leaderships, local mayors of the Arab municipalities. And we did many training. You can see a picture of emerging medical training in the right. On the left, you can see a training of supporting early childhood educators. And we did other training in setting up a crisis management hub, how to treat with volunteer, building employee resilience, and so on. And we did many campaigns. Missile defense awareness, it is very important because at the previous war, 15 years ago, in 2006, more than half of the people who died from the missiles were from the minorities. So it was a very big campaign that we did to work with them, with the local leaderships to enlarge the awareness. We promoting mental resilience. We did a lot of work with the financial issues. Do not take loans from the gray market, and so on. And with the local authorities, we did a very big survey to identify gaps, preparing the war that will come, and unfortunately come in the north. And we start to close this gap. We distribute shelters and first aid kits to the municipalities. We arrange a work about how the supermarket will be open in a war and there be enough supply of food for them. Many programs in employment. And what is the most important, we worked together with the civil society. We trained them for how to work in emergency management. We built a computer system to connect the needs from local authorities with responses from civil society organization and the military. And at the end, I can say that we did a big campaign of standing together. You can see students from the minority and public and regular students are learning together, working in the hospital together, or playing basketball together. So if I need to conclude, what do we need to succeed in a crisis? In fact, we need to work in regular time. We need trust. We need to build community, and we need to build infrastructure to work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bing, for that presentation. I will now invite delegations wishing to make comments and to pose their questions to our distinguished panelists. To do so, please press the microphone button. Just a reminder that let's keep our questions short and also to the point so that we can get as many interactions as possible. Also, please indicate to whom in the panel you are addressing your comment to. Thank you. I will now give the floor to His Excellency Ricardo Landero Miranda, who is the Vice Minister for Social Development of Panama.
Muy buenos días.
Very good morning to all of you. All protocols observed. Social resilience is the ability of a community to adapt and recover faced with damaging actions. Community cohesion and the efficacy of the administration is essential for this. At an individual level, you also need health, employment, and support networks. At a community level, there has to be a strengthened and decentralized community-level organization. In Panama, even though we have made progress with democratic governance, there are still challenges, such as territorial inequality and excessive centralization. This limits the ability of local governments to adapt policies to specific needs and address challenges. In addition, economic models, while they may be efficient, lack equitable distribution of the resources and a plan aimed at achieving social justice. In order to strengthen resilience, we propose the following: the decentralization of functions and funds to empower local governments. Secondly, strengthening international cooperation and collaboration. Finding technical and financial support, promoting inclusive policies that close territorial gaps and enhance citizens' participation. Social resilience should be a national and global priority, focused on equity, inclusion, and preparing for crises. On this last point, I am absolutely convinced that a large proportion of humanity is not prepared. Today, social resilience is more relevant than ever. I invite the countries participating to adopt protocols and norms to share the conclusions from Qatar. These should be implemented in each country so that they are not just part of academic texts. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I will now invite the delegation from Brazil.
Thank you. Thank you first for all the panelists for their interventions. I was actually especially provoked by the interventions delivered by Mr. Michael Woolcock and Ms. Obiageli Ezekwesili. Sorry if I mispronounced that. You guys mentioned that the solution would be to create the creation of safe spaces for negotiations, first point. And it was also mentioned that we have a lack of leadership capable of transforming problems into the solutions. So having this conceptual framework in mind, how do you guys think we can deal with these challenges in a context of budget constraints? I mean, what are we missing in terms of social innovations, in terms of social policies to tackle these problems? Thank you.
We'll collect a few questions. Next, I'll invite Her Excellency, Francesca Gelogas, Deputy Secretary of Social Services of Chile.
Muy buenos días, señor.
Good morning, Chair, delegations, esteemed panel. Thank you very, very much for such stimulating discussions. You've taken into account the local dimension of public policies, but also how, as policy actors, we are really thinking about the inclusion and distribution of power, especially given the challenges that we're facing. So this has been very interesting. On behalf of the government of Chile, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to intervene here that allows us to think about social resilience and the need to build universal and adaptable social protection systems in an increasingly challenging environment. The frequency and intensity of the crises that we're facing have shown that resilience is not just the ability to resist and recover, but also the ability to transform our societies to make them more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable. Chile has taken on the challenge of strengthening its capacity in the face of these challenges. It's very important to drive forward rights-based approaches at all levels. The experience of our country has shown that it is possible to deal with constant crises, mega fires, and other environmental challenges have shown that equitable access to essential services and the state's capacity to respond in a more agile fashion are crucial. We should rethink the structure of social protection systems to make them more inclusive, universal, and agile in the face of these emerging threats. The world of work is marked by automation and digitalization, and this represents challenges to society as well. Forced displacement and food insecurity being some of the consequences. If we do not deal with these realities, more and more people are going to fall outside of the existing social protection framework or safety net. For this reason, we have to have a framework that guarantees social protection for all and doesn't necessarily depend on formal employment. We should be able to include those in the informal sector as well as migrants. At the same time, as I have highlighted at other interventions, we think the path to this is to strengthen investment in the care economy and recognizing the important role of care work for the economy and for gender equality as well. We should focus on inclusion and ensure equitable access to connectivity, digital literacy for the entire population. In this context, we wish to ask the panel the following. What strategies would you highlight in terms of making progress in redistribution of care work at the local level and also redistributing care work within the public policy framework? And finally, resiliency cannot be addressed in isolation. There has to be robust international cooperation and an exchange of practices about funding mechanisms as well to ensure that we build more solid and adaptable social protection systems. I want to ask you about your experience in international exchanges where it has been possible to build capacity of resilience to threats thanks to international cooperation and exchange. Finally, Chile wishes to reaffirm its commitment to solidarity, equity, and the protection of rights, and we are fully available to work with the international community and make progress on this path. And we're very, very grateful to the panel that we've heard today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll now call on the delegation from Switzerland.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, as representative of the Swiss youth at the United Nations, I would like to draw your attention to the following. It is enshrined in our country's constitution that we are committed to a just international order, providing relief to populations in need and combating poverty while promoting human rights. These principles are similar to those that underpin the 1995 Copenhagen Declaration, which establishes that social development depends on peace, security, and the protection of fundamental rights, as well as the right to education. These are the pillars of a resilient society where youth are the driving force behind change and innovation and play a key role in development and social justice. The full participation of young people is therefore essential and requires solid institutions guaranteeing access to education, decent work, adequate housing, and quality health care. These conditions are crucial to amplify the potential of youth and strengthen social cohesion. Aware of these, some young people have also expressed their support and concern at the dramatic situation being experienced by some of the world's youth, particularly in the occupied Palestinian territory, Ukraine, Lebanon, Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Mr. Chair, there are regions where universities and schools have been targeted and destroyed, regions where tens of thousands of children have their lives upset and torn up. Regions where hospitals are reduced to rubble have seen their staff targeted and killed. Regions where the annexation of territory continues. Regions where it's no longer possible to live in dignity. Without functioning hospitals and health institutions, there can be no social development. Without schools and universities, there can be no social development. Without access to drinking water, adequate food, and decent housing, there can be no social development. Mr. Chair, without respect for human rights, any notion of development is inconceivable. In 2024, at the 34th International Conference of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, we were reminded that humanity must prevail even during armed conflicts. International humanitarian law and human rights must be upheld. Alas, the lack of concrete action to give substance to these commitments remains a dismaying reality. However, today's youth are not content to just simply observe. They know their responsibility. They're constantly calling on the world's decision-makings to uphold human rights, implement the 2030 Agenda, and take concrete action in the face of the horrors that are jeopardizing the future of a growing number of children and young people in the world. We have a duty to act with justice and responsibility. My generation thus calls for commitments to be translated into tangible realities to guarantee a world where everyone can live in dignity and peace. I thank you.
Thank you. I will now invite the delegation from the Philippines.
Good morning. We'd like to note that while life cycle risks remain the main source of challenges to individual social resilience, more frequent and complex crises are further straining social resilience. Madam Moderator, we agree with the policy recommendations outlined in the Secretariat's report, but we also would like to take note and agree with the number of important points that were raised by the panel, including the importance of implementation capacity or strengthening implementation capacity, the importance of leadership in translating these technical solutions to solutions that actually work on the ground. In our case, we're focusing in terms of the our medium-term development plan on reinvigorating job creation and accelerating poverty reduction by steering the economy back on a high-growth path, and more importantly, strengthening socioeconomic transformation for a prosperous, inclusive, and resilient society. We've been lucky. We have seen strong and stable economic growth averaging 6.1% over the last 4 years, reducing our unemployment rate from 10.3% to 4.3% in 2024. And as a result, poverty incidence in the Philippines has decreased from 18.1% in 2021 to 15.5% in 2023, with nearly 2.5 million Filipinos lifted out of poverty. We've also adjusted our medium-term fiscal program to a more gradual reduction of the budget deficit as well as the government debt to better balance fiscal consolidation with our development policies. On health, we are focusing on building an ecosystem with in communities for healthcare providers in a supportive environment where individuals can make healthy choices. On education and lifelong learning, we are focusing on improving quality by expanding access to quality learning resources, enhancing the curriculum, improving the competencies of teachers, and collaboration with the private sector through enterprise-based education and training. On governance, we're focusing on bolstering public accountability and integrity, deepening participatory governance, and improving bureaucratic efficiency. We have recently passed a new government procurement law which strengthens openness, transparency, and participation, among others. Madam Moderator, our question to the panel is, how can the UN strengthen the provision of crisis-related collaborative solutions, particularly in the face of challenges to multilateralism? If I may add as well, I think it's very interesting the point that was raised about leadership, and I would like to hear more thoughts about how our societies can consistently produce high-quality leaders. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a reminder to all the delegations, let's stick to the 3 minutes for our submissions. We'll now go to the delegation from India.
And all the distinguished panelists for this very enlightening discussion. India recognizes the pivotal role of strong social resilience systems for advancing Agenda 2030 for sustainable development. To achieve this, we have adopted a whole of government and whole of society approach to address issues on a life cycle continuum basis for the educational, social, economic, political empowerment of all sections of the society, with a special focus on women, children, tribal, and other marginalized sections. Social protection measures such as the National Social Assistance Program, creche facilities, working women's hostels, homes for the destitute, scholarship schemes, life and accidental insurance coverage, universal health coverage, amongst others, provide essential support to women, persons with disabilities, and senior citizens, and have been instrumental in mitigating extreme poverty during crisis situations. Drawing from the lessons learned during the COVID pandemic and recognizing the revolutionary role of technology, India has modernized service delivery systems through digital public infrastructure. We have leveraged the Aadhaar model, providing unique identification number to each resident, and adopted direct benefit transfer to ensure last-mile delivery of essential services to the intended beneficiary. For global good, India is happy to share its digital public infrastructure. For instance, to track the nutritional needs, growth, and well-being of over 100 million children and pregnant women and lactating mothers through real-time monitoring of 1.4 million Anganwadi centers, providing frontline healthcare delivery and located in all habitations across the country, an innovative digital application Poshan Tracker has been developed by India. For children in need of care and protection, India has a robust legislative and administrative framework. The network of over 4,300 childcare institutions not only provide all kinds of essential services to these children, including financial assistance, but also prepare them as empowered citizens for the future. To ensure planned financing and monitoring of resource allocation for social resilience, India has long adopted gender budgeting, which has seen over 4 times increase in a decade, with the current allocation at around USD 51 billion. India stands firmly committed to bolster social resilience through interlinked and comprehensive social protection and mitigate the impact of multidimensional crises on extreme poverty, including intergenerational and feminization of poverty. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, India. I would also like to just let you know that the request to speak is now closed, and then I'll give the floor to Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Zimbabwe is designing a shock-responsive social protection system in order to bolster social resilience in the context of more frequent and complex crises. Empowerment strategies for vulnerable groups, such as the Zimbabwe Livelihood, Sustainable Livelihood programs, are being implemented in order to transition from a remedial approach to a developmental approach. The program is meant to build capacity and foster self-reliance among vulnerable populations to absorb and adapt to shocks and ultimately become resilient. Additionally, His Excellency the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Dr. Idi Mnangagwa, introduced climate-proof agriculture initiatives supported by a presidential input scheme to achieve zero hunger and ensure food and nutrition security. Interventions in achieving decent work by continuously working with our social partners of labor and employment to raise standards of work and increase productivity. At universities and colleges, there are interventions for innovations and industrial hubs so that we have both technical and vocational skills inputs in our economy. These policies ensure that vulnerable populations are more prepared and resilient in the wake of shocks and disasters like droughts, floods, cyclones, diseases, and many more. The government of Zimbabwe implements unconditional social transfers, both in kind and cash, to reduce negative coping mechanisms, rebuild asset stocks, reduce debt burdens, and have greater impacts on nutrition, investments, and productivity, as well as economy-wide multipliers, with long-term consequences and potentially better value for money overall. By 2030, Zimbabweans envisions a prosperous and empowered upper middle income society, and this can be achieved with reduced poverty, productive employment, and decent work coupled with social cohesion and provision of social safety nets, which are developmental in nature. I thank you.
Thank you. I will now call on the delegation from the European Union.
Thank you very much, moderator, and thank you to all the speakers for the thought-provoking statements. It was very motivating and enlightening to hear this, especially in the preparation of the World Social Summit. The European Union is fully committed to the promotion of social protection and the promotion of bolstering social resilience, including in the context of fragile crisis. From our perspective, adequate social protection for all is a key component of decent work, as an important tool in poverty eradication and a powerful one to reduce socioeconomic inequalities. Shock-responsive social protection systems can also bolster people's resilience to withstand crisis, for example, caused by the effects of climate change. In this regard, it is key to better link adaptive social protection and climate financing. All countries, as part of the ongoing update process 2025, should be encouraged to integrate social protection into their climate strategies and NDC implementation. This would allow to enable climate financing, and in particular the financing by multilateral climate funds, to be also targeted towards making social protection systems adaptable and responsive to climate-related catastrophes and strengthen the contribution of social protection systems to mitigate climate change. We would have two questions for the panelists. The first one, talking about the World Social Summit, we would be very interested to hear the expectations that you would have from the World Social Summit's contribution to establishing a universal right-based social protection system and bolstering social resistance, and how will these contributions and commitments should be followed up. And will social protection be one of the summit's focus themes? And the second question would be regarding the green and digital transformation, and how can we ensure that these transformations contribute to inclusive growth and social justice? What specific attention and support do the most vulnerable and disadvantaged require in order not to be left out? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will now call on the delegation of Mali.
Je vous remercie, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. First of all, I would like to thank all of the briefers and congratulate them on the quality of their briefings. I have a question to Ms. Obiageli Ezekwesili, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. Madam, I listened to your statement, and I saw that you were underscoring a government crisis, in particular the democracy part of it. And the multilateral bodies are impacted of that. Now, if the SDGs are only on track for 20% of their goals, and other commitments were undertaken on the plan of the future, the international financial system is imbalanced. So, on the basis of your expertise, what are you planning? What are you thinking so that we move from speeches to tangible actions, in particular in developing countries? I thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move to the final submission from Burkina Faso, the delegation from Burkina Faso.
Merci.
Thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, current crises, whether they are climatic or environmental, they all affect people in poor countries the most. And for this, we must build universal protection systems based on human rights so we can address these challenges. In this regard, Burkina Faso has implemented a number of initiatives. These are major for us, notably the National Humanitarian Spending Fund to provide educational and food to populations in distress. And we also have targeted subsidies for the most vulnerable households in the country. Universal healthcare coverage is currently being generalized across the country to ensure healthcare for all vulnerable people, especially the older persons and those with disabilities. We also recommend a contributions-based system based on solidarity and innovative partnership. Integration of social resilience in our development strategy highlights prevention of vulnerabilities as a key factor, as well as international cooperation that is adapted to the local context. In conclusion, our country is committed to promoting universal and adaptive social protection to guarantee the dignity and inclusion of all citizens. I thank you.
Thank you, Burkina Faso. I will now give the floor to each panelist so that they can respond to any questions that were directed to them and also to deliver their final key message. So the panelists will respond in the order that they spoke. So we are going to begin with Mr. Michael Woolcock.
Thank you, and thanks to all of you for coming today. You could all have been doing something else, but you chose to be here and participate in this conversation, and that's great. I'm just going to speak to the question of leadership, because I think I can actually speak specifically on that. Largely because part of the work that I do at the World Bank has been focused on trying to build not just the capability of systems to do a better job at what they aspire to do, but recognizing that getting to a situation where that can actually happen will require very strong leadership. And we all know, we all work in organizations of one kind. We all know what good leadership feels like and looks like, but can we nurture it? Can we actually grow it? Well, not instantaneously. Right? It has to evolve over long periods of time, and you have to have really good HR systems that are able to require and promote that kind of approach. But just quickly, over the last 5 years, I've been working very intensely in Cambodia with a very strong Cambodia team, where we've tried to introduce, or have introduced to over 1,000 of its most senior public servants, a Leadership and Innovation Program, LIP. And that's the two halves of this. It's all been around trying to recognize that for achieving the kinds of ambition and the kinds of inclusion that is so important, especially in a country that is still healing from the atrocities of the 1970s, that really strong leadership is possible. And the World Bank can't provide leadership. The leadership has to emerge very organically from within the Cambodian administration itself, and it has certainly done that. This whole program has survived to at least one big national election, so unlike so many other places where you automatically ditch what the previous administration did because your approach is better, there's been a really strong support for this across multiple different political parties. It is now the most important priority of the Cambodian government. What are we doing to achieve that? We like to think we are creating these spaces for leadership to emerge, for being able to give people some practical guidance on looking after themselves and being able to be an effective leader when there's a lot of pressure to be doing things other than just being a good leader. But the essence of what we're trying to do is to really help them be good problem solvers, to see their job as being really focused on solving the problems that citizens themselves bring to them. And that even that stance itself is radical for many people for whom being a public servant actually isn't a public servant. You're just being obedient to those people in positions of power. And trying to change even what the word public servant translates into in local languages to really imbue it with that sense of you are serving the people, you are helping to use the resourcing of the public sector to enhance the capability of our workers to be able to engage with you on your own terms, to be able to identify, prioritize, and respond to these challenges in incredible, locally legitimate ways. So we can do these things. How do we get the money for that? Well, this particular work has been funded by donors, but the forthcoming World Development Report will be focused on domestic revenue generation and how we can do a better job at being able to help generate the revenue that's going to be needed for a world that's only going to keep getting more complicated and more complex. And the digitization of things, I would suggest, is going to be just a world of wild variation, and there'll be spectacular successes that we'll all celebrate and produce little documentaries around how wonderful it is. And we won't produce a lot of videos on just how divisive and alienating and scary it is for a lot of people. And that's the trade-offs. That's the price we pay for engaging with our own revolution. And we have to be cognizant of how that's played out in the past and recognize that it can go in really good directions and go really bad directions. And we have to be able to figure out how to anticipate those and manage expectations around all of that. That's a leadership task, and we can do that. It's just in the quintessential social space, because you can't pluck it off a shelf. You can't can it. You can't reduce it to a 10-point plan. You can't stick it into an Excel spreadsheet and pump money in one end and see beautiful leaders come out the other. So much of our work, we would love to be like that, but because it isn't, we've got to do it differently. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a reminder to our panelists that you have to answer and deliver your closing statement within 3 minutes. So, Madam Obi, over to you, 3 minutes.
So thank you very much. I think there were two particular questions that mentioned me specifically. The question that was asked on how do you, within budget constraints, tackle the problem of fixing public leadership. My answer to that is in the action that I actually had to take. So I set up School of Politics, Policy and Governance and designed it in a way that we're basically training the kind of leader I will vote for. So instead of staying in a place of what I call learned helplessness, powerlessness, that a lot of citizens that are poorly governed are staying in, we decided to turn it around. So we established this School of Politics, Policy and Governance, starting with Nigeria. Already, we have trained 713 people by identifying top talents from across society, private sector, civil society, even public sector, training them to become the next genre of public leaders. What are we training them for? We're training them for character, competence, and capacity. We need to have politicians that have these three attributes: character, competence, capacity. If we don't have them, we're not going to go far. And it's low-cost model. Right now, we have moved beyond Nigeria. We're going to graduate the school in Senegal for their first cohort. It's a 10-month program of very serious technical, but a lot of it also bordering on the attitudinal issues. And then finally, Madam Moderator, there was the question that asked, what can the UN do to strengthen collaboration, especially in the light of threats to the multilateral system? Well, the UN can start by looking at itself in the mirror. Just take a look at yourself in the mirror and know that something is just not right in our world today, despite the existence of the UN. One of the things I know about life is that a problem you deny can never be solved. You can't solve a problem you deny. The UN is important for ensuring that very tough conversations can happen across the borders of countries. We do need a new multilateral design. We know that we solve problems better through multilateral collaboration. But today's multilateral collaboration is broken, and it cannot be fixed by tinkering on the margins. So we do need bold conversation, and it has to be led by bold leadership from within the UN, and finding allies across the world for that. And to my sister from Mali, I forgot, just 1 minute. My sister from Mali did say that, multilateral order, multilateral partners, and then what do countries do? My dear sister, all development is local. All development is local. Ownership has to be exercised by the countries of especially our continent. The key thing that we do need to know as a continent is that this could be our best moment. It could be. It's the leadership gap that's not making us see that this could be Africa's best moment. Average age in the world, 44 for Europe, 39 for America, 39 for China, 38 for America, 29 for India. Africa is 18.2, 18.9. In what, if you were sitting in a boardroom, which of the countries or which of the regions would you invest in?
Thank you very much,
Africa.
Madam. We'll now have the closing remarks and responses from Mr. Marek Kamiński for 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. And there were no specific questions to me, but I think we are living in the time of emptiness of meaning, emptiness of purposes in life, and the resilience, which is adaptation to fast-changing world, and the ability to give the sense for our actions and our life, and in the short and long term is there is no education about this skill, and there are no programs that are incorporated in the education program, especially for young people. So I presume that it will be more and more problems, mental problems in the world, more and more suicide, and it will be independent from the GPT, and independent from the place in the world or economy. It will touch every country, because in every country the reality is changing so fast, and we are living in the multi-dimensional reality. So we are overwhelming with all this information, and we cannot deal with this. So if we don't act very quickly, if we don't introduce the program, especially for young people, but also for the older people and the people that are retired, we will address more and more mental problems, and in the end, it will be global problem for the government. So I really think that we should be very quick in decisions, because this problem is hidden, and there are no capacities, no resources for dealing with the mental health problems. So many people are on the streets. Many people nobody care about them, and I'm sure that this problem will be bigger and only bigger and bigger. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now go to our final panelist, Mr. Bing.
Thank you. Preparing for emergencies requires working professionally and transparently with the local community during routine times. Then, when a crisis arrives, you can respond quickly. As Michael said, when you succeed in the program, and we succeed in Israel in our program, you help some or a lot to move forward, but you also widen the gaps between those who are left behind. So this is a very, very big challenge that we need to deal with, and I think that every place that have a program need to deal with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bing. And thank you also to the delegations that have contributed to making this a very rich discussion. I think we've all got a lot of takeaways as we think around policies, how effective the implementation and the legitimacy is. And then also we look at the concept of have we abandoned social contracts? How are we doing on social cohesion and cooperation? And then how are we going to leverage on international cooperation to achieve universal social protection? And then the thing that I think most of us do not discuss enough is the mental resilience. What happens when you are in poverty? Are you going to be able to pick yourself up without addressing your mental state, the anxiety, the depression? So all those are things that we need to look at. And then the importance of trust issues within the communities, trust issues around governance. And all these are concepts that will really enrich our discussions as we get ready for the World Social Summit and discussions around universal social protection. I will now thank you all for your contributions and hand over to the floor back to the chair, His Excellency, Mr. Sharisky from Poland. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. Of course, with that, we have reached the end of the panel discussion on the policies to bolster social resilience in the context of more frequent and complex crises. It was so packed that we prolonged it for 10 minutes. Thank you for your participation of you all in the panel. I thank Madam Moderator, Ms. Kawandami, for skillfully guiding our discussion and keeping us all interested in the topic. So I would also like to thank, of course, our distinguished panelists and delegations for the participation and contribution. With that, we now briefly pause the meeting to rearrange the podium for the next panel discussion. So please remain seated. We will follow. I mean, there are just two sides of the same main theme of the social resilience. So it will be actually the pure continuation of what we just heard. So please remain seated for a moment. Colleagues, please take your seats. We'll begin shortly.
So how long is this session going to go?
I mean, the whole session is till Friday.
This the whole week.
Yeah, whole week. Actually, I shrinked it from the. Normally it was a week and a half, but there was not much interest in the other over the weekend because people are just having other issues. So the week is just better. Okay, colleagues, excellencies, colleagues, welcome to the second panel discussion. So I invite the Commission to hold the panel discussion under the theme Universal Rights-Based Social Protection Systems that adapt the evolving risks and support social resilience. And I know, as you see, this is a continuation of the first panel, so you also see some familiar already faces in the panel for the second one from the first one. So it is a kind of continuation, also in person. So I'm pleased to welcome to the distinguished panelists of our second panel discussion. First of all, His Excellency Mr. Danilo Turk, the President of Club de Madrid, former President of Slovenia. Welcome, Excellency. Ms. Angela Kawandami, we know her very well, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Community Development and Social Services of Zambia. And new faces, Mr. Hector Ramon Cardenas Molinas, Executive Director of the Technical Unit of the Social Cabinet of the President of Paraguay. Welcome. And Mr. Ed Gilson Tavares de Araujo, the Director of the Department of the Private Social Assistance Network of the Unified Social Assistance Systems in the Ministry of the Development and Social Assistance of Brazil. And I'm also pleased to welcome the moderator. We all know him from the first panel, Mr. Michael Woolcock, the lead social scientist in the Development Research Group at the World Bank. Before I hand over the floor to the moderator, as always, I wish to remind the panelists to please keep within their allocated time limit of 7 to 9 minutes, and delegation to keep within the 3-minute time limit or less during the interactive discussion that will follow the panel. I thank the participants for understanding, and I give the floor. Mr. Wilcock, you have the floor now. Please proceed.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning again, everybody. I'm going to be very brief since we're already a bit behind schedule, so just reminding everybody what our central discussions are going to be focused on in this second panel. That is universal, rights-based social protection systems that adapt to evolving risks and support social resilience. So those are the problems and the solutions sort of wrapped up in the title. And we're going to have presentations that help us work through all of that. I'll just have a brief recapitulation of what we mean by social resilience, because that's the key mechanism we're trying to invoke here by using social protection systems of one form or another. For our present purposes, we are going to recognize that social resilience refers to the capacity of individuals and societies to prevent, resist, absorb, adapt, respond, and recover positively, efficiently, and effectively when faced with a wide range of term prospects for sustainable development, peace and security, human rights and well-being for all. So that's the essence of what we're going to be doing. We've got 7 to 9 minutes for our 4 presenters to take us through each of these different, their own particular countries, but also just reflecting more generally on the role that social protection systems can play. So without further ado, I will hand over to His Excellency Danilo Turk to give us his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. And thank you all for coming to this meeting. I would like to start by saying that I'm speaking on behalf of Club de Madrid, which is an organization of former democratically elected presidents and prime ministers. We are more than 120 members, and we have supported the idea of the second summit, the World Summit on Social Development, from the beginning of that discussion on such a summit. We are very interested in assisting in the process, and we'll be happy to participate in the discussions that will evolve in this context. I myself have participated in 2 panels so far. This, I think, is my 3rd this week. And of course, this is just one example of our close interest for the work in the preparation of the summit and also for the success of the summit. Now, we are today expected to discuss universal rights-based social protection systems. And everybody understands that the connection between social development and human rights is complex and sensitive, and that any human rights discussion can very easily slide into a political and sometimes even acrimonious discussion, and this is something to be avoided. I believe that one of the things we have to remember is the work of the United Nations done related to this subject, the subject that we are discussing today. And here I would like to refer to something that happened back in 1986. At that time, the General Assembly adopted the Declaration on the Right to Development. With that declaration, it emphasized that, in fact, in order to achieve full realization of human rights, one needs development. This is something that is not accepted by everybody. This is not seen as something axiomatic. But it is important, and it has to be recalled today. It has to be recalled because we have to be clear when we start discussing relationships between human rights and social development that we do not particularly think about new normative developments. We are not particularly thinking or emphasizing the problem of violations of human rights and everything that goes with that discussion on violations. We need to look into a relationship between human rights and social developments in a much more comprehensive way, and what I would say also in a much more proactive manner. Because the emphasis here is in the understanding that social development is the way to full realization of human rights. And full realization goes beyond what we in the UN usually mean when we talk about implementation of human rights standards. Human rights standards, of course, have their own implementation mechanisms, but that's only part of the picture. In the complex social reality, one has to make sure that social development is guided in a manner that actually helps the full realization of human rights, that the human rights become a reality. And therefore, we need serious, we need conscientious, and I would say also tolerant discussion about these questions, away from acrimony that often characterizes human rights discussions. And I would say that in order to have such a discussion, we have to look at the work for human rights and social development in a proactive manner. This means adopting an approach which anticipates and addresses vulnerabilities of people. And that includes also such areas as the consequences of climate change, very importantly displacement due to various factors, and other problems that affect human rights. Again, without acrimony, with full understanding, with goodwill, with something that would create hope for a responsible and productive process. Second, in addition to proactivity, it's important to incorporate in the discussion the digital technologies which should be leveraged to enhance the reach, efficiency, and responsiveness of social protection systems. Innovations like digital cash transfers, mobile health services, data-driven risk assessment, and others can significantly improve service delivery, particularly for marginalized and remote populations. However, we must ensure that digital divide does not become a new barrier to success. Inclusive digital literacy program and investment in universal internet access are very important in this context. And again, in order to achieve progress in that regard, the digital technologies aspect require, again, responsible and creative discussion, which the process for the Second World Summit on Social Development will hopefully offer. And finally, resilience requires inclusivity. Social protection systems must take into account the interest of vulnerabilities faced by different segments of society, particularly women, youth, older people, persons with disabilities, and so forth. Now, the reality of our time is such that we live in the time of transition. We have to be sensitive to that. And that transition is characterized largely by green and digital transition, the need for developing economic structures into green and digitally defined structures. And two requirements of transitions have to be taken into account very seriously. First is equality and equity. That should guide the discussion, and that would help the discussion to be productive and successful. And secondly, one has to find the right approach, the right attention to financing for development, which is essential for leveraging social protection system as a policy tool for just transitions towards green and digital economy, and as a consequence to social development more generally. Now, I'm referring to the financing for development aspects, not only because that aspect has always been there in the discussion, one way or another. I am saying this because also, in particular, because later this year and before the World Social Summit, there will be an important conference convened in Spain. The fourth international conference is on financing for development, which, of course, will shape the international understanding of the nature of needed cooperation at this time. And that, of course, will have a big impact on what happens at the Second World Social Summit in Doha in November. So I would suggest that governments should pay particular attention to the consequences which reach beyond the pure technically defined area of finance and development in its more narrow meaning, into a way in which the whole spectrum of issues defining social development will be properly understood when delegates prepare themselves for the fourth international conference on financing for development. I would like to conclude with that, and I look forward to hearing the views of my fellow panelists who will, I'm sure, add many important ideas. And of course, we have to start our discussion for the preparation of the World Social Summit with all these different, hopefully, I'm sure, creative ideas in mind. I thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, His Excellency. Again, for the purposes of catching up on some time, I think we will have all our presentations together, and then individuals can pose their questions, followed by representatives of different country delegations. So, on to our second presenter, Ms. Angela Kawandami.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Zambia recognizes that social protection systems are central to addressing vulnerabilities, reducing poverty, and mitigating the impacts of various risks such as climate change, pandemics, and economic crisis. The Human and Social Development Cluster, under the National Development Coordinating Committee, plays a key role in framing and implementing policies that aim to protect the most vulnerable populations and foster resilience against these evolving challenges. Zambia's social protection systems work within the broader context of addressing these risks and promoting inclusive development through various aspects. One, the reduction of vulnerability. Social protection systems in Zambia are designed to address both short-term needs and long-term vulnerabilities. These systems include cash transfers, food assistance, public works programs, and social insurance schemes. There's also health insurance. The goal is to ensure that individuals, especially those in our rural areas, the older persons, persons with disabilities, and other vulnerable groups have access to basic services and support mechanisms. The role of social protection in addressing vulnerabilities. one targeting the most vulnerable. Zambia's social protection programs aim to reduce vulnerability by providing financial support to households that are living below the poverty line, enabling them to meet basic needs like food, healthcare, and education. Climate change resilience. Zambia is very highly vulnerable to climate change, including floods and droughts. Social protection programs such as cash transfers and food aid help affected populations recover and adapt. Additionally, the government's National Adaptation Program of Action highlights the importance of integrating climate risk into social protection policies. Poverty reduction. Zambia faces very high poverty levels, with 60% of the population living in poverty, especially in rural Zambia. Social protection plays a key role in poverty reduction by providing safety nets and enhancing access to essential services. The role of social protection in poverty reduction, the cash transfer programs. These programs, such as the social cash transfer, provide regular financial support to poor households, enabling them to cover basic needs, including food and education. By lifting people out of extreme poverty, these programs contribute directly to poverty reduction. They also do away with the need for negative coping mechanisms, such as removing children from school to work to supplement the family income, to sell any family assets like livestock and any equipment. And they also, like another coping mechanism is where people stop using healthcare services because they're not able to afford. Then we have the Public Works Program. Through the Public Works Program, Zambia provides temporary employment for individuals who are unable to secure regular employment. This also helps reducing poverty in both rural and peri-urban areas. Then we have the school feeding programs. This social protection program that includes the feeding schemes for children, so who are from low-income households, they have access to food at school. This improves the nutritional outcome for the family, reduces stunting, it improves school attendance, and it also improves the educational outcome. The risks that are linked to climate change. Climate change poses an increasing threat to Zambia with more frequent droughts and floods, which affects agricultural productivity, food security, and livelihoods. Social protection systems play a crucial role in helping vulnerable communities cope with these climate-related shocks. We have climate-responsive social protection. So we link social protection with climate adaptation strategies. Zambia provides cash transfers and assistance during times of disaster, such as droughts and floods. And we should also mention that sometimes the disasters are also economic shocks, like high food prices, high petroleum prices, and then the vulnerable people need support to be able to meet their basic needs. Through the Zambia Disaster Management and Mitigation Unit, we work to see that social protection schemes provide relief and recovery programs. Social protection mechanisms can be scaled up during emergencies by providing immediate relief to those affected by climate-related disasters. Adapting to digitalization and technology. As Zambia increasingly integrates digital technologies into its economy, social protection systems are being digitalized. Addressing digitalization, support for digital inclusion. By promoting digital literacy and access to technology, Zambia's social protection systems has helped vulnerable populations participate in the digital economy. This includes initiatives to improve access to digital skills training and promote equitable access to digital services, providing benefits in digital forms. Digital cash transfers and mobile payment systems are increasing efficiency and reducing the cost of delivering social protection benefits. Programs such as like the social cash transfer are increasingly being delivered through mobile phones, ensuring that even those in remote areas can efficiently access the support. Addressing pandemics and health risks. Zambia, like many other countries, faces public health risks. Social protection systems have proven essential in mitigating the economic and social impacts of health crises by providing cash transfers and food assistance. The role of social protection in pandemic response: one, there's health insurance and medical support. Zambia has begun to expand access to health services through its social protection system. The government is implementing an insurance scheme that provides affordable health care to all citizens, particularly the poor. We are currently piloting, with the support of ILO, paying health insurance for over 16,000 households of marginalized groups, which include persons with disabilities. Elderly people who are over the age of 65 have free access to health care. Cash transfers during crises. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Zambia provided emergency cash transfers to support vulnerable households who were impacted by lockdowns and restrictions. This provided households with a buffer to cope with the economic shocks caused by the pandemic. Zambia's economy is highly dependent on mining and agriculture, making it vulnerable to global economic fluctuations, commodity price shocks, and other economic crises. Social protection systems play a crucial role in helping individuals and communities navigate these economic uncertainties. Job creation and skills development support. We have public works programs, skills training initiatives that can help individuals whose livelihoods are disrupted by economic downturns, providing them with temporary income and employment opportunities, which also provide skills for the future. Under Zambia's National Development Plan, the Human and Social Development Cluster focuses on improving the well-being of the population by addressing vulnerabilities, promoting poverty reduction, and improving access to education, health services, and social protection. Social protection is a core component of this cluster and is integrated with other programs that are aimed at inclusive, sustainable growth, human capital development, social equity, and access. In conclusion, social protection systems are crucial in addressing a wide range of vulnerabilities, from poverty and climate change risks to the challenges that are posed by digitalization, pandemics, and economic crises. Social development plays an essential role in promoting inclusive development, resilience, and poverty reduction. By strengthening social protection mechanisms, governments and countries can provide a more secure foundation for its citizens, enabling them to cope with risks and emerge more resilient in the face of future challenges. With political will and commitment to social protection, we have, as a government, have continuously advocated for the inclusion of social protection in national development plans and budgets so that social protection programs are prioritized. This has necessitated the alignment of social protection with broader national goals such as poverty reduction, sustainable development, and economic resilience. In conclusion, we recognize that strong coordination of programs and strategies is integral to the success of social protection programs in building resilience among the poor and vulnerable. By providing vision, ensuring coordination, advocating, and securing financing, we can create systems that not only provide immediate relief, but also empower people to overcome future challenges. We must ensure that social protection becomes a sustainable, adaptable, and inclusive mechanism for enhancing resilience, reducing poverty, and addressing risks such as climate change, economic crises, and social inequalities. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mrs. Kamandamani. Okay, we're moving straight through, and we're going to go to Paraguay now and hear from Mr. Hector Ramos Cadenas Molinas.
Muy bien, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you all. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to tell you about the progress and challenges that have been made in Paraguay and that we've found. Could I display the slides? Paraguay has a rights-based social protection system aimed at improving the quality of life of the population. It consists of linking together actions for all of the inhabitants of the country through access to goods and services based on a life cycle approach. It helps to deal with crisis situations and vulnerability in crisis to guarantee a degree of well-being that makes it possible to sustain minimum levels of quality of life and to ensure that policies are implemented in a coordinated manner across the territory through social protection platforms. And there are three pillars in our system.
Primero, la integración social.
Firstly, social integration, which is linked to universal and selective policies that are aimed at vulnerable populations, those in poverty. Second element, employability and productive employment, linked to labour inclusion and regulation policies. And a third pillar, social security, linked to contribution-based, essentially contribution-based, but also a non-contribution-based policy. The system has defined strategic objectives and actions organised according to the various stages of the population's life cycle. At the moment, there are over 30 institutions planning specific indicators and targets at the national level. Next slide, please. The historical framework of the social protection systems covers the region of Latin America. We had the first social protection systems in Latin America at the beginning of the previous century in the areas of health and employment. And this began in Paraguay in the second half of the last century. However, today, with a systemic and holistic view of this only began around 10 years ago. For us, it began in 2017 when we created a team. We then drafted a document that was then made official through official decree in 2019, and it applies across all government entities, as well as civil society and the private sector. We have now been through three different governments with this system, and so we don't start anew or start from scratch with each new government. The cash transfers, for example, that we initiated at the beginning of this century have now been implemented by 7 successive governments. At present, the government has been in place for about a year and a half, and they are engaged in reviewing and updating the document and scaling up action. The previous government implemented this across 4 districts. It's quite a small country, Paraguay, 6 million inhabitants and 250 districts or municipalities there. The mandate of this government is to scale up the program. And there is a meeting on the March the 18th as part of this social cabinet where we will be incorporate 30 new districts in addition to the 22 prioritized districts already implementing the plans. Next slide. Extreme weather events in Paraguay. They affect not only Paraguay and the region of Latin America, but the world. This is a recurrence of adverse events that cause damage and loss to actors and sectors in society. Most of them are linked to climate events. The most frequent ones are floods, droughts, heat waves, severe storms, and forest fires. All of these have a high economic, environmental, and social impact. It's important to highlight that all of us are potentially vulnerable and exposed to such situations, depending on the environment in which we live. It's important, therefore, to consider how we protect against these, especially in vulnerable communities. This is an image that shows the interactions that exist between climate events, development processes, and exposure to climate change. All of these are interlinked, and they're crucial to understanding how societies can be affected by climate change. By way of example, communities that live in vulnerable zones, such as regions that have a lot of droughts or a lot of flooding, are more exposed in these risk-prone areas and therefore more likely to suffer negative impacts of climate change. Exposure depends not only on geographic location, but also on the development policies and the adaptation measures that have been taken to mitigate the impacts of climate change. Climate-linked events are natural phenomena that are intensifying due to climate change. And it therefore becomes absolutely essential that we integrate policies and strategies that promote sustainable and resilient development in the face of climate change. Next slide, please. Adaptive social protection. This is an approach that seeks to combine social protection systems such as economic assistance, health services, insurance, amongst other things, with specific strategies aimed at adapting to the effects of climate change and other related risks. The concept here is that social protection systems should not only respond to the traditional needs of people or society as a whole, or those specifically in poverty or with health or education needs, but systems should also adapt and adjust to mitigate and address the impacts of climate change and other environmental, social, and economic shocks. We have an adaptation roadmap in harmony with our national planning processes that are represented mainly in the Paraguay National Development Plan through 2030. And we have defined a roadmap with a first national communication on adaptation and a national adaptation plan have been drawn up. The aim is to render visible and drive adaptation actions that are already under progress or planned for the future, and ensure that they are embedded in responsible and key institutions and amongst the main actors of the 7 adaptation sectors and cross-cutting axes. Next slide, please. The Ministry for Social Development has developed a social plan for adaptation to climate change covering the period 2024 through 2030. This set of strategies is implemented at the local level to tackle the effects of changing climate and promote adaptability amongst vulnerable communities. The approach is oriented to design and implement specific actions within districts to reduce climate risks and to increase the resilience of the population. In terms of tackling extreme events, these plans seek to strengthen the capacities of local authorities and communities to address the impacts of climate change much more effectively. Next slide, please. I've been asked to talk about the conditional money transfers program as a tool, a very valuable tool, I think, that can be used in this period of great change. This program, which means living well in Paraguayan local language, seeks to improve the living conditions of families in vulnerable situations in Paraguay by promoting their social integration and their ability to cope with adversity, especially in a context of poverty. It is a money transfer program proportional to family means, and it is conditional. So it implies joint responsibility in the area of health and education and nutrition. This is particularly useful for situations that require a swift response, and I'm referring here specifically to registers of payment systems and other tools that this program has. Next slide, please. Another interesting theme that we have experience with in Paraguay is incorporating quality management in the provision and delivery of social services. This refers to a set of processes, policies, and tools that are designed to ensure that the services that are provided to the population, especially to those in vulnerable situations, are of high quality, accessible, and effective. This implies that social services and social programs must not only be sufficient or adequate in terms of the coverage, but also in terms of their response capacity, efficiency in delivery, and above all, in meeting the needs of the users. There are a number of different mechanisms that we have incorporated at the Ministry that reflect this. For example, ISO 9001 certification, the National Award for Excellence in Management Quality, and the highest ratings in the standard model of internal controls in Paraguay, and all public institutions are subject to this. And these successes are clear evidence of our commitment to quality and to the continuous improvement in the management of services provided by the Ministry of Social Development. These certifications and awards are key instruments, both internally and externally, and they allow us to ensure that the processes and services that have been provided meet the very highest standards of efficiency, effectiveness, and transparency. Finally, I'd like to highlight a few challenges. The main challenge that we face, and that has been mentioned since our first day here, is the matter of financing, funding, guaranteeing sustainable sources of financing for the system, and expanding coverage of protection programs to the most vulnerable populations, and improving the efficiency and effectiveness of the system, as well as implementing and integrating new technologies and innovative approaches into social protection systems. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you very much. All right, our final presentation takes us to Brazil, where Mr. Edson Tavares de Araujo will tell us all about how it's done in Brazil.
Gracias, señor presidente, señor.
Thank you very much, Chair, distinguished panelists, distinguished delegates, delegations from the Ministry of Development and Social Assistance and Family and Fighting Hunger. I'm very pleased to participate in this important panel. For more than 3 decades, Brazil has built a robust and solid system of social protection that is distributive, not contributions-based, and structured within our constitutional framework for social security. It's based on the principles of universality, equity, and democratic participation. The single social assistance system has become a benchmark in an integrated framework for social protections, ensuring support for those in vulnerable situations and those at social risk, aimed at social issues such as inequality, hunger, poverty, and violence of all kinds. In 2005, the SUAS will be marking 20 years as a model of social assistance that is continuous, planned, and universal. Social assistance services represents 12 different types of services, ranging from special mid-level protection through to high and complex levels of support and institutional hosting, foster families, and emergency protection in situations of disaster. Secondly, economic support. This supports 4.7 million people with disabilities and older persons with low levels of income. It also provides occasional support to pregnant women, orphans, and so on. Thirdly is a conditional money transfer program. A family basket was re-established in 2023, and 53 million people benefit from this, and it guarantees access to education and healthcare for millions of children and women, including vaccination service and prenatal care. Fourthly, rights, advice and guidance, programs that strengthen social protection and defending the rights of citizens. All of this is being carried out through integration of the single cadastre data. This is an important planning instrument for public policies. It provides a holistic snapshot of the living conditions of Brazilian citizens that are most vulnerable. It brings together information about income, housing situations, ethnicity and race, education, disabilities, and so on. The SUAS is present across the entirety of the country in 5,571 municipalities, 26 states, and the federal district. We have almost 9,000 centers, reference centers for social assistance, nearly 3,000 specialized centers, 7,000 shelters, over 9,000 community centers, and over 2,000 day centers for persons with disabilities. This means that there are 27,000 state units and 34,000 organizations from civil society involving 470,000 workers. In 2023, 43.9 million people were given personal attention services in this way, and 7 million received collective support. The tripartite commissions for cross-cutting management provides agreements at the federal, state, and municipal level, and there are bipartite commissions involving the state and municipalities. Broad level participation across all federal entities through social assistance, advice, and with the equal participation of government and civil society is significant. We have beneficiaries, workers, as well as civil society organizations. There's also planning activities and accountability, and I'm honored at the moment to be the chief of the National Council for Social Assistance. This SUAS has this system, our system, has been through governments of the right and the left over many decades, and it has shown itself to be resilient. It is not just a policy of the government, but truly a public policy in that it represents democratic values and it strengthens social resilience. Since 2023, we have seen a drop in 84% of severe food insecurity, according to the 2024 report of the United Nations. And population living in poverty has fallen by 67.7 million people to reach a level of 59 million. A proportion of people in extreme poverty has fallen to a level of just 4.4% of the population. With the creation of a global alliance to fight hunger and poverty, we hope that our system will continue to be a strong and resilient social protection system. We are also amplifying our system to emergency and disaster situations, innovating our strategies and adapting them. For example, a disaster occurred in the state of South Rio Grande, and we have created a cooperation strategy across federal agencies to coordinate human and logistical resources aimed at preparation and response and also recovery to the emergency, ensuring that everybody who's been affected receives support. And so I would like to highlight that building resilient societies involves building public policies from a strong state working in alliance with civil society as a joint producer of these policies. The state, civil society, and public policies have to be resilient in order to transform society and create resilient communities. We must understand that a key dimension of this involves activism from civil society as well as the state bureaucracy and the mobilization of users and workers within the system through fora and collective action. We also need to ensure that the key assets, the values and the practices such as intersectionality, recognition of social markers of gender, race, class, ethnicity, and disability can create identities that are discriminatory and can sometimes cause prejudice and are generative of inequalities. But we have a very democratic public spirit that is aimed at combating all forms of oppression and violence and inequality such as sexism, racism, ableism, and other forms of discrimination. It's increasingly necessary for us to integrate the recently established national care policy. We're increasing our budgetary commitment and broadening our global alliance to combat hunger and poverty. Our commitment to decent employment, an economy of solidarity, the creative economy, the circular economy, amongst other strategies, can help build social protection and resilience. We're strengthening resilience through our network of social protection and fundamental areas such as development of the economy and defending rights for citizens, users, and their families. Human dignity is essential for society. Social connectivity and building community links and networks are crucial. Being protected means having someone to rely on. In this case, people and their families in situations of vulnerability and at social risk can rely on our single social protection system. The SUAS is a program of social protection and resilience. Social assistance is a right. It is guaranteed through a resilient public policy that is an inseparable part of social development. This is not just a policy that makes human indignity just a passive part of our society. We actually have a proactive and preventive approach, and thus we can strengthen social resilience and trust. Thank you for your attention.
Excellent. Thank you very much to all of our presenters. We now move into the Q&A, and we're going to do this, as in the previous session, in two parts. The first will just be an open call for anybody, individuals that might like to pose questions to our panelists. Part two, we'll move to entries from various different country delegations. But we'll start with any individuals who would like to pose questions to our panelists. Are there any? All right. For now, we will go to Panama then, who would like to provide some comments on this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. All protocols observed. I'd like to thank you once again for giving Panama this opportunity to intervene. This panel on universal social protection systems, rights-based social protection systems, I would like to pose two questions on key issues. How can these systems adapt to an evolving risk scenario, and how can we facilitate a fair transition to a green and digital economy? Social protection systems are fundamental in terms of guaranteeing basic rights and promoting human development. However, their effectiveness depends on their ability to address changing challenges such as economic crises, natural disasters, or pandemics. To achieve this, we must have coordination across institutions, and we must develop devolve competencies to local government to ensure swift and effective responses in the local area. Green and digital economy brings challenges and opportunities. The green economy requires workers to be to have their skills adapted in certain areas, and we must adjust to new technologies as well. We must guarantee access to new opportunities while avoiding the exclusion of the most vulnerable. We should not see social protection as spending, but rather investment in equity and resilience. It's fundamental for public policies to reduce inequalities so that we can ensure that nobody is left behind by these changes. Otherwise, we would deepen the social gap in education, in healthcare, and in many other areas. The right policies of government should go the other way. Unfortunately, in Latin America, it's very frequent to have a new government come in and dismantle the policies of the previous government, deepening inequalities. And this is why I suggest that the recommendations from the Doha meeting, which were produced in a declaration that brought together all of these commitments and where the participating governments signed it, this should be shared more broadly. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, His Excellency Miranda. You're the Vice President for Social Development in Panama. We now move to Zambia. His Excellency from Zambia.
Thank you very much for the well-deliberated panelists. I think I have a question just coming to, particularly for Paraguay. Very interested in the adaptive social protection that they're implementing. And I think it's something that is quite ideal, looking at where we are as countries with all the crises that we've been going in, particularly with the climate change, which I think we relate to very well as Zambia. So my question is just that maybe just to share also on the challenges maybe that they've had in terms of implementing the adaptive social protection vis-a-vis the life cycle, in terms particularly of the legal framework, because I think the success of implementing the rights-based approach that we're talking about, the universal social protection, the adaptive social protection really lies on the strong kind of policy frameworks that we have in place. So I'd like them just to share in terms of how they are doing with that, in terms of the legal framework, the regulatory framework, how it has worked for Paraguay, and also what issues they have around achieving the flexibility that is required for adaptive social protection, and how they are ensuring that the social protection systems adhering to the human rights standards. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished representative from Zambia. We now move to the European Union, and then representatives from India and then the Philippines. That's the European Union, please.
Yes. Thank you very much. Indeed, universal rights-based social protection is a crucial issue, and considering that almost half of the world's population has no access to any form of social protection. In this context, gender gaps in social protection remain substantial. If we consider that of the 33.8% of the world's working age population covered by comprehensive social security system, the large majority are men, and there is an 11% gap. So for achieving gender equality and empowering women is a priority from the EU perspective, and is also a critical enabler in addressing economic growth, combating poverty and social exclusion, and so strengthening resilience. So we have taken different measures at the European Union level on that, different pieces of legislation on work-life balance, pay transparency, and also the European care strategy has contributed to improve access to the labor market and working conditions for carers, most of whom are women. social protection is also particularly important for children. We have discussed this also yesterday a bit, given their vulnerability and the need to break the cycle of disadvantage by ensuring equal opportunities from birth. So we have, on the European level, the European Child Guarantee, which aims to prevent and combat social exclusion and guaranteeing access of children in need to a set of key services. Also, persons with disabilities are disproportionately disadvantaged and have a higher risk of poverty than persons without disabilities. So the EU and the member states are fully parties to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and we have also developed strategies to ensure that people with disabilities can be included in the society, facilitate access to rights, including to education. So I would also like to mention that, as it was also spoken by certain of the panelists, that it is also essential, social protection, to ensure that transformative changes, such as those posed by the green and digital transition, climate challenge, are also managed in a fair and equitable manners. Just to conclude, to say that the EU keeps supporting not only its member states, but also partner countries by announcing cooperation and partnerships, including with the private sectors and financial institutions, to promote the strengthening of social protection systems. International programs have largely focused on reinforcing nationality-owned system, policies and institutional capacity, expanding coverage, including to informal economy, sustainable financing, digitalization and shock responsiveness, and the humanitarian development nexus. Thank you.
Meticulously timed. Thank you. To the distinguished representative from India.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you, distinguished panel. India recognizes that emerging risks in a digitally evolving world and risks associated with the immediate and long-term impacts of climate change cannot be addressed without strong foundations of social protection based on collaboration. I would like to highlight some of the key initiatives India has taken in this regard. About 546 million citizens, including more than 300 million women, are now brought under formal financial systems in the past 8 years. Approximately 256 million rural jobs are provided annually to ensure continued household income under NREGS. Through universal health coverage of $6,000 to 550 million needy and vulnerable population with special focus on poor and disadvantaged women, under the world's largest public funded health insurance scheme, India is providing affordable health care for all. Unified Payments Interface, UPI, developed in India, is driving countries' shift towards a cashless economy, transcending urban-rural barriers and empowering women to adopt digital payments. Digitally driven governance tools such as cashless direct benefit transfer also reduce scope for corruption, thus making service delivery transparent and easy for the poorest and most vulnerable sections of the population. To shape a greener future that is inclusive, India aims to have net zero carbon emissions by 2070. Recognizing the transformative power of technology, from training women drone pilots to mitigating harmful impact of pesticides on health, to solar home lighting systems, till the last mile and clean cooking gas connections, safe tap water connections, India is taking multifaceted steps towards a just and inclusive transition that reduces women's drudgery. I would like to conclude my remarks by underscoring that India is committed to building socially secure and resilient world through technology transfer and sharing of best practices in a rapidly evolving world. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Very good. Now to the distinguished representative from the Philippines.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We, of course, agree that social protection is a vital tool in reducing income inequality and strengthening individual and societal resilience. In our case, our social protection plan focuses on 3 key areas. First is the progressive implementation of a social protection floor to provide essential health care and income security for all, particularly the most vulnerable across all life stages. This includes ensuring adequate funding for universal health care, ensuring the country's conditional cash transfer program, and improving access to critical services. Second is the development of an adaptive and shock-responsive social protection program to enhance resilience in times of crisis, ensuring that the most disadvantaged populations are protected. For instance, unconditional emergency cash transfers are provided to disaster-affected families. We've also recently launched a food stamp program to decrease the incidence of involuntary hunger and food insecurity. Third priority is to rationalize, modernize, and integrate all of the social protection systems to streamline and integrate various programs and improve their efficiency, effectiveness, and coverage. As part of these efforts, we have established a community-based monitoring system, which together with the national ID system, we expect will enhance targeting, complementation, and minimize leakages. Our question, Mr. Moderator, to the panel is, given the importance of social protection programs, what in their experience are the best practices for ensuring that these programs are not exploited for political gain? Thank you.
Very good question. Okay, so we're now in our final two contributions. The first from Life Project for Youth. Can the representative from there make themselves known?
Thank you so much. Excellencies, thank you for this very inspiring intervention in both panels and the opportunity to ask a question. I am Alexia Grob from Life Project for Youth, an organization dedicated to innovative solutions for the inclusion of vulnerable youth, a fundamental element of social cohesion and sustainable poverty reduction. I learned personally about resilience through textbook definition, but I understood its true meaning only when I met the real experts, those who live resilience constantly. Muni, 18, from India, who lost her fingers as a baby but became the fastest typist in her training. Aparijita, 18, from Bangladesh, overcame poverty, discrimination, child marriage, and domestic violence while managing early motherhood. In case of natural disaster, when a typhoon hit the Filipino slum, marginalized youth were already organizing, rebuilding, and supported the community as soon as they could go out without external support, but with remarkable frugality, creativity, and unity and solidarity. Or the thousands of excluded youth transforming their community. With an efficiency we struggle to match informal system. Those to whom resiliency or resilience is not a concept. Actually, they don't know this word. They call it life. At LP4Y, we have seen that empowering just 10,000 marginalized youth can uplift 130,000 lives. Their resilience benefits communities, businesses, and entire societies. They bridge the gap between policy and reality, intention and concrete actions. They hold the courage, insight, and innovation the world needs. But how we truly value the resilience and voice of people targeted by support as we seek to build universal race-based social protection system and global programs. How we involved those who can design and implement efficient solutions in their communities, and also there to ensure the accountancy of involved stakeholders. My question is the following. How can we institutionalize and implement the sustainable systemic inclusion of marginalized young people excluded from economic, political, and social spheres, hundreds of millions of them actually, into policy and project developments, ensuring that we all drive social resilience and the sustainable transformation we all seek. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We have one more country delegation that would like to speak, so could the distinguished representative from Jamaica please speak? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Climate change continues to impact many countries negatively, in particularly small island developing states such as Jamaica, that are predisposed to high levels of exposure to more frequent and intense disasters. Adverse natural events such as hurricanes, earthquakes, droughts, and so on certainly affect the vulnerable population in terms of their livelihood, health, and security. In light of other challenges such as migration and forced displacement, I want to ask, what are some of the strategies and additional support that can be employed or provided to small island developing countries such as Jamaica to build greater resilience? Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Our final contribution will come from Agora Ciudadanos Cambiando Mexico.
Excellencies and distinguished delegates, I am Aditi Kumar, representing Agora Ciudadanos Cambiando Mexico. I'm speaking on behalf of the major group of youth, children and youth. This discussion highlights the need to adapt social resilience structures, but we must go further, restructuring the current system itself. As a global public health and humanitarian action professional, I'm deeply concerned about how slowly change occurs while lives are increasingly lost every day. Therefore, I'd like to suggest some actionable steps to accelerate progress. Firstly, we must increase child agency and deinstitutionalization in complex emergencies. Children in crises grow up faster than those without adverse childhood experiences, often orphaned, institutionalized, neglected, and deprived of autonomy. Therefore, policies must increase the right of child agency, ensuring their voice and decisions affect them. Additionally, evidence from Ukraine and Syria show that deinstitutionalization fosters community integration and better health outcomes. Secondly, refugee aid must also support host communities facing similar struggles. When I was deployed in Uganda, I saw firsthand how allocating a proportion of refugee program services to the host population fostered social cohesion. Their needs, laughs, and cries were just as loud as refugees. Thirdly, with increasing humanitarian crises lasting decades, we must reevaluate the outdated model of refugee camps in humanitarian protocols. Camps foster dependency, erode agency, and keep humanitarian action trapped in cycles of unsustainable aid. Refugees deserve sustainable solutions. Uganda's success in integration over encampment proves this. Balancing short-term convenience with long-term cost-effectiveness is crucial, as the current systemic reliance on aid risks collapse of the humanitarian system. Even with improved logistics and coordination, camps remain ineffective as a long-term solution. Breaking down silos between sectors is crucial, and the people are soon forgotten and left to live in systems which are not designed for disease outbreaks, food security, or sustainable development have to be taken care of. Addressing data gaps is critical. Many refugees live outside camps, yet are overlooked in demographic data collection and resource allocation. Policymakers have to critically recognize this magnitude. Social resilience policies must also mandate financing for older adults and people with disabilities. If youth lack formal decision-making power in social protection systems, a youth committee with voting representatives from member states can highlight discrepancies between youth and senior votes, identifying areas needed for urgent reform. Just because things have done a certain way for so long does not necessarily mean it's working. Times have changed and so should we. So with the UN's power to lead this humanitarian reform, how will you create protocol for youth to accelerate social resilience reform? Thank you.
Very good, thank you. So we are now in the final wrap-up stage. I'm going to hand it back to each of our four panelists. We are short on time, as we are bound to be almost in these big discussions. So I'm going to ask that they be more self-disciplined than I was and keep themselves to 1 minute. Then we will turn it back to the chair for some concluding remarks, and we'll call it a day. But we'll go in the order in which we were hearing earlier on. So can His Excellency Turk provide a quick response to any of the questions that were asked or comments made that you think are relevant to you and that you can speak to? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to make 3 points very briefly, because I think we had a very fruitful, very rich discussion, and that offered a great deal of ideas for the future. And the 3 points are this. First, the Ambassador of Panama actually offered questions and answers at the same time, because his reference to technology, local authorities, and the need to understand the social development policies as investment, they are they are very important. They are critical, and I hope they will find a good reflection in the Doha Declaration. Secondly, we heard a very interesting, very impressive presentation of the experience of India. And I think it would be very good if such experiences were fully presented in the process leading to the Doha conference, because we see the transformative role of technology and innovation in administration of social policies in real life. And that should be reflected in the discussions of the UN and in the final document. So I think that that kind of approach is really very helpful and should be pursued, not only, of course, listening to India, but to all countries with specific experience. And finally, and of course I would like to say here that the element of youth could be more strongly represented in such, let's say, presentations. And finally, when the delegate of Philippines spoke about best practices and need for them not to be exploited for political gain, I would like to say, well, you know, it's not too bad if some positive results are used for political gain, because politicians should show that they are actually capable of, you know, bringing something good for the people. And therefore, it's not being against the political gain, but rather about managing the political gain. Political gain will be there and should be done in ways which really move progress further. Thank you. These are my quick comments.
Very good. Thank you. Ms. Kamandamin.
I think Panama, when spoke about how social protection can support transition to a green and digital economy, this should be at the design stage. If you say, for example, that you want to do something around the green economy, we have something like where you start looking at what's this climate smart public works. So you design the program so that everybody working on it is working towards something. If we are planting trees, if we are going to be clearing gullies of water, so we know what we're doing. So this intervention should come in at the design stage. And I would also like to comment on the Philippines on when you're saying that how do you keep politics out of the program? I think everything to do with human beings has a certain amount of politics, but another thing that works is to digitalize the process as much as possible. Let the applications be digital, let the assessments be digital, and then institutionalize as well as much as possible. Let it be policy or let it be the law. And then also, if possible, don't name it after any particular politician. Just let it be a government program, I submit.
Very good. All right. Mr. Carreros Manales.
Okay, muchas gracias.
Thank you. I will refer specifically to the question aimed at Paraguay from Zambia, the Zambian delegate. Adaptive social protection systems basically have a core concept combining traditional social protection systems with the specific strategies that we need to adapt to the impact of climate change. Paraguay's experience began last year with the support of the World Bank. We have a document, and according to the World Bank, we are the #1 country in the region with a specialized document like this. The UN, I think through the FAO, invited us and Brazil in March and April to share this experience, this pathway. And basically that's what it's about, that combination to adapt social protection systems to the necessary strategies. We have lots of information, and all countries have information about the arid zones, the zones that are susceptible to flooding and so on. And according to this diagnosis, we can adapt the services that are going to be necessary for that population. And in general, they tend to be vulnerable to those issues in those regions, for instance. We can even go further and extend this. the Ministry of the Environment and Sustainable Development has a governing document, and it covers things at a very broad level nationally, and so this has to be adapted to reach the local level, and that's why we have for this other framework. On the question from the Philippines, how can we ensure that these are not used for negative political ends? This is really about the rights-based approach that is cross-cutting throughout our institutions. It's not just a flag to be brandished by the left or the right. This is really about rights-based situations, and and you have to respond to the needs of the population when they're expressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that leaves us to our final input from Mr. Cardenas Molinas.
Gracias.
Thank you. On the question from the Philippines, I think there are no issues when it comes to policy. Sometimes the policy can be sort of abused for private ends or other ends as well, including even in Brazil. Our response to this it looks to the broad citizens' participation. That, I think, is the key to ensuring that public policy doesn't get misused. The National Conference on Social Assistance was convened and cancelled by the government, and civil society and the workers in the system actually created the National Front for defense of the system, and they created the National Front for the Defense of Social Assistance in 2019. So I think this broad involvement of citizens is absolutely crucial. In terms of adaptive support systems, Brazil has invested a great deal in monitoring systems. And we also have a standing office on crises to support and to monitor all of the issues related to climate change and so on. This allows us to think more about strengthening a variable threshold for highly complex emergencies, such as, for instance, having to move due to climate change or those sorts of issues. Thank you.
Many thanks, Mr. De Arroyo. My apologies for misnaming you before. All right. I now kindly invite you to join me in expressing our gratitude to all of the panelists for their outstanding contributions. I would also like to extend our sincere thanks to all the delegations who have contributed to the interactive dialogue we've had today across these two sessions. The discussions from these two panels will be reflected in the Chair's summary and be part of the inputs to ECOSOC and its high-level segment, as well as the 2025 High-Level Political Forum. Thank you very much for joining us today. I now return the floor to the Chair.
Thank you so much. Some important information are coming just up now. But first, just to say that we have reached the end of the panel discussion on emerging issues under the theme on universal rights-based social protection systems that adapt the evolving risks and support social resilience. I thank Mr. Woolcock, of course, for the skillfully guiding our discussion and ending it on time. And I would like also to thank our distinguished panelists and delegations for the participation and contributions. So, dear colleagues and friends, the Commission has thus concluded its program of work for this meeting. The general discussion of sub-items A and B of the agenda item 3 will resume this afternoon at 3 p.m. The live list of speakers is expected to be exhausted this afternoon. In light of this, I propose that the Commission conclude the general discussion under agenda item 3A and B at the meeting beginning this afternoon at 3. Do you have any objections or comments to that? So we'll conclude the general debate today afternoon. So no sessions tomorrow of the general debate. The rest of the program goes as prepared. just the general debate. Is not. There will be no debate on the general debate tomorrow. We conclude this afternoon. I hear no objection, so it's decided. All delegations remaining in the list of the in the list of the live speakers are requested to be in this conference room at 3 p.m. to deliver their statements and thus to conclude the general debate. The meeting is adjourned. Okay.